I was 24 when I met Cooper. Though if you'd asked me that spring whether I believed one ordinary summer could change the direction of my life, I would have laughed and told you that nothing ever happened in the tiny town where my grandpa lived. Every June, I drove 3 hours from the city to spend a few weeks with him. Ever since my grandmother passed away, I'd made it a habit. He never asked me to come, but every phone call ended the same way. You know, Grandpa would say, the guest room hasn't forgotten what you look like. That was his version of saying he missed me. His place sat on the edge of town, surrounded by fields that seemed endless when I was a kid. Time moved differently there. People still waved from passing trucks. The grocery store cashier knew everyone's birthday. Nobody locked their front doors unless they were leaving for vacation. I liked the quiet more than I admitted. My office job paid well enough, but after 9 months of fluorescent lights, endless meetings, and traffic that made every commute feel like punishment, spending a month in the countryside felt less like a vacation and more like remembering how to breathe. The first morning after I arrived, Grandpa was already outside before sunrise. I found him leaning against the fence with a coffee mug in one hand. "You're getting slower," he teased. "I'm on vacation. No such thing around here." He nodded toward the neighboring property. "You see that fence?" I looked over. The old white fence separating his land from the neighboring farm leaned at an angle that suggested it had been losing an argument with gravity for years. Needs replacing? Nope. It already fell. Nope. Then what? He smiled into his coffee. "Cooper's been trying to fix it alone." I followed his gaze. The neighboring farm stretched farther than I remembered. Red barn, large equipment shed, rolling fields disappearing behind clusters of oak trees. When I was younger, an older couple had lived there. I vaguely remembered homemade pies appearing on our porch and Christmas cookies arriving every December. I thought the Harrisons lived there. They did. And they retired to Florida last year. "So who's Cooper?" Grandpa shrugged. "Their grandson." That was all he said. It should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, about 20 minutes later, I heard the unmistakable growl of an old pickup truck pulling into the neighboring driveway. Grandpa glanced over without saying anything. I looked too. The driver climbed out carrying a toolbox. Tall, broad shoulders, baseball cap turned backward, faded jeans covered in dust. He looked older than me at first glance, but only because the sun had already darkened his skin and there was something confident about the way he moved. He noticed us watching, lifted one hand. "Morning." His voice carried surprisingly well across the field. Grandpa waved back. "Mornin', Coop." Then Grandpa nudged me with his elbow. Well, what? You gonna wave?" I rolled my eyes. "You're unbelievable." "I know." So I raised my hand. Cooper grinned. Not a polite smile. A real one. The kind that somehow reached all the way across the distance between the properties. That should have been the entire interaction. Instead, 20 minutes later, someone knocked on Grandpa's front door. Grandpa answered before I could. Well, look who wandered over. Cooper stood on the porch holding 2 peaches. "I picked too many." Grandpa laughed. "You always pick too many." "I know." Then Cooper noticed me standing in the hallway. "You must be Chase." I blinked. "You know my name? Your grandpa talks about you." Grandpa looked completely unashamed. "Only good things." "I seriously doubt that." Cooper smiled again. "No, actually, mostly good things." "Mostly." That made Grandpa laugh loud enough to scare birds out of the nearest tree. "I like him already," Cooper said. "You've known him 30 seconds. Still counts." There was something ridiculously easy about talking to him. No awkward introductions. No forced conversation. Just comfortable. Like we'd skipped the part where strangers carefully measured each other. Grandpa invited him inside. The two of them immediately started discussing tractor parts. I understood maybe every 5th word. Cooper eventually looked over. "You know anything about repairing fences?" "Not unless YouTube counts." He nodded thoughtfully. "Fair answer." Grandpa took another sip of coffee. "You should recruit him." I wasn't going to ask. "You should." Cooper scratched the back of his neck. "I mean, I could use another pair of hands." I looked between them. "This feels planned." Grandpa looked offended. "It absolutely wasn't." "It absolutely was." Cooper laughed. "I honestly didn't know you were here until this morning." "That part's true. Scout's honor." "You were a scout?" "No." "So that's not convincing." It sounded convincing. Grandpa pointed toward the back door. "Go help the poor boy. I've been here less than 24 hours. So I plan to relax." You can relax while carrying fence posts. I don't think that's how relaxing works. Grandpa simply smiled. You'll survive. Cooper looked genuinely apologetic. Only if you want. I should have said no. I'd spent months dreaming about doing absolutely nothing. Instead, I heard myself answer, I guess one afternoon won't kill me. Grandpa muttered something suspiciously close to, that's how it starts. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. An hour later, Cooper and I stood beside the broken fence under a bright summer sky. He handed me a pair of work gloves. You ever done this before? No. You'll learn. You sound confident. I fake confidence surprisingly well. I laughed. So do I. He smiled. Good. Neither of us knew it then. But that fence would become the first of many reasons I kept walking across that field all summer long. The first hour was mostly me discovering just how little I knew about farm work. I carried boards the wrong way, held tools upside down more than once, managed to drop an entire bucket of nails into the grass. Cooper watched the nails disappear between the blades, sighed dramatically, then looked at me. You trying to make this take until Christmas? I thought we were planting them. He laughed. That was terrible. I know. I respect the commitment, though. He knelt beside the bucket, picking up nails one at a time. I joined him. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut hay across the fields, and somewhere behind the barn, chickens complained loudly about something only chickens understood. This isn't exactly what I imagined doing on vacation, I admitted. What did you imagine? Sleeping until noon. You're talking to someone who was up at 5. That sounds illegal. It feels illegal. I smiled. So why'd you come back? He glanced toward the farmhouse. My grandparents built this place. And when they retired, someone had to decide whether to sell it. You chose not to. No. Big decision. The biggest. He hammered another board into place before continuing. I worked construction in the city for a few years. Really? Yeah. What happened? I realized I spent more time looking at photos of this farm than enjoying where I actually lived. He shrugged. So I came home. That's simple. He smiled faintly. Not even close. There was something in his voice that told me there was more to the story, but he didn't seem ready to tell it. I didn't push. Instead, I picked up another fence post. Where do you want this? He pointed. Right there. I carried it over. Too confidently. The uneven ground caught my boot, and I stumbled forward. The post slipped from my hands. It didn't hit me. It landed directly in the mud. Unfortunately, so did I. For exactly 2 seconds, everything was silent. Then Cooper burst into laughter. Not polite laughter. The kind that completely takes over. He bent forward, one hand on his knee, trying unsuccessfully to catch his breath. Oh, he laughed again. Oh, I'm sorry. You're not. No. Another laugh escaped him. Not even a little. I looked down at myself. Mud covered one entire side of my jeans. Well, I sighed. I guess they're farm clothes now. That somehow made him laugh harder. Eventually, he managed to calm down enough to offer me a hand. I accepted it. He pulled me back to my feet. You okay? My dignity needs a minute. I think it'll recover. You don't sound convinced. I've seen worse. That doesn't help. No, he admitted. It doesn't. By lunchtime, we'd finished nearly half the fence. I was exhausted. Cooper looked like he'd barely warmed up. You hungry? He asked. I could probably eat the toolbox. Let's aim slightly lower. He led me toward the farmhouse. Unlike Grandpa's place, everything here looked like it had been repaired 100 different times over the decades. Nothing matched. The porch steps were newer than the railing. The windows had clearly been replaced. The paint wasn't perfect, but somehow it all fit together. Inside, the kitchen smelled like fresh bread. I baked yesterday, Cooper explained after noticing me looking toward the counter. You bake. I eat. That wasn't my question. I know. He opened the refrigerator. I also bake. I wasn't expecting that. You're full of surprises. My grandmother insisted everyone in the family learn. She sounds smart. She was. He set out sandwiches, homemade pickles, and slices of watermelon. This is way better than anything I would have made. What would have you made? I would have ordered delivery. He laughed. To the middle of nowhere. I would have tried. Good luck with that. We ate on the back porch overlooking acres of fields. It was unbelievably quiet. Not empty. Just peaceful. I realized I hadn't looked at my phone in almost 4 hours. That never happened back home. You're smiling, Cooper said. I am. Yeah. Guess I didn't notice. He leaned back in his chair. Most people don't. What do you mean? They come out here thinking they'll get bored. And then somewhere around the third day, they stop checking the time. I thought about it. So what's the catch? There isn't one. There has to be. He shook his head. The only hard part is leaving. Something about the way he said it made me wonder how many times he'd had to leave before finally coming back for good. After lunch, we finished the fence. By then my shoulders ached. My hands were sore. And I was fairly certain I'd discovered muscles that had never existed before. Cooper stepped back to admire our work. Well, you carried things. I also fell. That was memorable. I knew you'd bring that up again. Oh, absolutely. He grinned. Probably all summer. All summer. He froze for just a second. I mean, if you're around. I'll be here another month. His expression brightened. That's good. There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. I've got another project tomorrow. Oh, the old equipment shed. That sounds dangerous. It probably is. I assume you're asking for help. Maybe. I haven't agreed yet. I know. He smiled. But you probably will. I crossed my arms. You seem awfully confident. You came back after lunch. So, you could have gone home. I guess. But you stayed. He wasn't wrong. I had stayed. Not because I loved repairing fences. Definitely not because I enjoyed being covered in mud. Yet somehow, the day had disappeared without feeling long. Working beside Cooper had been easy, comfortable, natural. As we walked back toward Grandpa's place that evening, he stopped at the property line. Thanks. For what? Helping. You supplied lunch. I would have supplied lunch anyway. I smiled. In that case, you're welcome. He nodded. I'll see you tomorrow. I looked toward Grandpa's porch. The old man was pretending not to watch us. Pretending very badly. I laughed. Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow. Cooper smiled one last time before heading back toward his farmhouse. When I reached Grandpa's porch, he was already rocking in his chair with the kind of satisfied expression that immediately made me suspicious. You look tired. I am. You also look happier. That obvious? To someone paying attention. I sat in the chair beside him. You planned this. The fence. Meeting Cooper. Grandpa stared out across the fields. I just introduced two good people. That sounds suspiciously innocent. Sometimes innocence tells the truth. I wasn't convinced. But as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the fields and I caught myself looking toward the neighboring farmhouse one more time, I had the uncomfortable feeling that Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. That alone should have worried me. Back home, dragging myself out of bed before 8 felt impossible. Here, sunlight poured through the guest room window just after 6. Birds argued outside, and somewhere nearby an engine rumbled to life. I walked into the kitchen expecting to find Grandpa reading the newspaper. Instead, his chair was empty. A handwritten note sat beside the coffee pot. Went into town. Don't let Cooper work too hard without supervision. I laughed. There wasn't even an attempt to hide what he was doing anymore. I poured myself coffee and stepped onto the porch. Across the field, Cooper was already outside. He was unloading lumber from a trailer, stopping every few minutes to wipe sweat from his forehead. As if sensing someone watching, he looked up. Even from that distance, I could see him smile. He raised one hand. I answered with the same gesture. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Need a volunteer who's only moderately afraid of heights. I stared at the message, then looked across the field. Cooper held up his own phone. I couldn't help smiling. How did you get my number? Almost immediately. Grandpa. Of course. I never approved this exchange of personal information. 3 dots appeared. He said you'd complain, but answer anyway. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. I typed one more message. How high are we talking? His reply came instantly. Low enough that I can catch you if you panic. I looked back toward him. He gave an exaggerated shrug. I shook my head, grabbed another cup of coffee, and started walking across the field. By the time I reached the equipment shed, he'd already set 2 ladders against the side of the building. Morning. You actually came. You bribed me with confidence. I'll remember that. The shed roof looked older than I expected. Several loose metal panels rattled gently in the breeze. So, I said slowly, how dangerous is this? He considered the question. Honestly, I'd prefer honesty. Maybe a 3 out of 10. That doesn't sound terrible. Unless you're afraid of ladders. I wouldn't say afraid. What would you say? I respect gravity. He laughed. Healthy attitude. He handed me a pair of gloves. You're staying on the lower ladder. So you don't trust me. I barely trust myself. That actually makes me feel better. For the next 2 hours, we worked side by side. Mostly, my job involved handing him tools and pretending I wasn't watching him balance so casually several feet above me. You're staring, he called down without looking. I was making sure you didn't fall. Sure, I was. You're a terrible liar. I've been told. He climbed down to grab another sheet of metal. So what do you actually do in the city? I manage marketing projects. He blinked. That sounds important. It mostly means meetings. How many meetings? Too many. And they pay you for that. They do. He looked genuinely impressed. I've been doing life wrong. No, I said. I think you've been doing it right. He paused. What makes you say that? I looked around. The fields. The trees. The quiet. This. He followed my gaze. You get used to it. I don't think I would. You'd be surprised. Maybe. Maybe not. Around noon, clouds began gathering overhead. Dark ones. Cooper noticed immediately. We should finish this side before the rain gets here. You think it'll rain? He looked at the sky. I know it'll rain. How? He pointed toward the western horizon. See that? I see clouds. And the wind changed. I listened. It had. When you've lived here long enough, he said, you start noticing things. That's impressive. My grandpa taught me. Within 15 minutes, the first drops hit the roof. Then another. Then dozens. Well, Cooper sighed. Guess that's our lunch break. Rain came hard and fast. We hurried inside the equipment shed just as the downpour turned the dirt road into muddy tracks. The sound on the metal roof was almost deafening. Neither of us spoke for a minute. We simply watched the rain fall beyond the open doorway. I always liked storms, Cooper said eventually. I hated them as a kid. Really, I thought lightning was specifically looking for me. He laughed. That's a lot of pressure for lightning. I was 6. Fair. The rain kept falling. Neither of us seemed in any hurry to leave. Cooper sat on an old wooden crate. I leaned against the workbench. So, he asked, can I ask you something? Depends. Fair enough. What? Why aren't you seeing anyone? The question caught me off guard. What makes you think I'm not? You've been here 3 days. And you haven't once checked in with anybody. I smiled. You've been paying attention. A little. I looked out at the rain. I dated someone about a year ago. What happened? We wanted different lives. He nodded slowly. No drama. Not really. No cheating. No. No huge fight. I shook my head. We just realized we were trying to convince each other to become different people. That sounds harder than a fight. It was. Silence settled again. Finally, I looked back at him. What about you? He smiled to himself. I was wondering if you'd ask. So, I haven't dated anybody in a long time. Your choice. He hesitated. Mostly. He rubbed the back of his neck. I got pretty good at convincing myself work was enough. And was it? For a while. And now? He looked directly at me. Now I'm not so sure. Something shifted in the air between us. Nothing dramatic. Just quieter. More honest. Neither of us looked away. The rain continued falling outside, creating a curtain between the shed and the rest of the world. It felt strangely private. Then Cooper smiled. So, you still moderately afraid of heights. I still respect gravity. Good. Why? Because after lunch, we're climbing back up there. I groaned dramatically. You almost had a serious moment. I know. I ruined it. You definitely did. He laughed. Good. And somehow, sitting inside that old equipment shed while rain hammered against the roof, I realized I wasn't looking forward to the end of the storm. I was looking forward to whatever conversation we'd have after it. The rain lasted almost an hour. Long enough for the fields to darken and the air to cool, but not long enough to ruin the rest of the day. When it finally eased into a light drizzle, Cooper stepped outside first. He tilted his face toward the sky for a second before nodding. We're good. You're sure? If we wait another 15 minutes, it'll just get hotter. That somehow doesn't sound encouraging. It isn't. I followed him back to the ladders. The roof still looked unnecessarily high. You're smiling, I said. You're avoiding the ladder. I was appreciating the architecture. This shed has no architecture. Then I'm appreciating its historical importance. He laughed. You're stalling. I absolutely am. Come on. With exaggerated reluctance, I climbed the ladder. Halfway up, I stopped. Cooper. Yeah. If I fall, you won't. You interrupted my dramatic speech. Because you won't fall. You're no fun. I've been told. Working on the roof turned out to be less terrifying than I'd imagined. Mostly because Cooper explained everything before asking me to do it. Pass me that panel. This one. The other one. There are three. The shiny one. They're all shiny. He sighed dramatically. You're enjoying this. A little. Dangerous amount of confidence for someone who planted nails yesterday. I've grown. In 24 hours? Remarkably. He shook his head. I walked right into that. By late afternoon, the roof was finally secure. Cooper climbed down first. I followed much more carefully. The moment both feet touched the ground, I let out an exaggerated sigh of relief. I survived. You did. I deserve a medal. I was thinking lemonade. I'll accept. We walked toward the farmhouse. This time, instead of heading for the porch, Cooper led me around the back. Behind the barn stretched a surprisingly large vegetable garden. Tomatoes, corn, beans, rows of herbs. This is incredible. My grandma's project. You kept it going? I couldn't let it disappear. He picked 2 tomatoes straight from the vine and handed one to me. Seriously? Try it. I took a bite. It tasted nothing like the tomatoes from grocery stores. Sweeter, brighter, actually like a tomato. Oh, I know. I've been lied to my whole life. He laughed. That's usually people's first reaction. We wandered through the garden without much purpose. He pointed out different plants. I admitted I couldn't identify half of them. You really don't know basil? I know it once it's in pasta. He looked disappointed. You're impossible. I've lived in apartments my whole life. Fair point. Near the far corner stood an old wooden swing hanging beneath an enormous oak tree. The ropes looked weathered but sturdy. My grandparents used to sit there every evening. Cooper said quietly. You still do? Sometimes. When it's been a long day. He sat down. The swing creaked gently. I sat beside him. For a while neither of us spoke. The breeze carried the smell of wet earth after the rain. Birds had started singing again. Everything felt slower. Can I tell you something embarrassing? Cooper asked. Always. The first morning I saw you. He smiled to himself. I assumed you'd hate this place. Really? You stepped out of your grandpa's truck wearing white sneakers. I looked down at my shoes. They're not white anymore. They definitely aren't. So you judged me. A little. I thought first impressions mattered. They do. And my first impression lasted about 5 minutes. What changed? You carried fence posts. I dropped fence posts. You kept helping. I looked across the fields. You know what my first impression of you was? What? That you smiled too much. He blinked. I do. You do. That's bad. No. Then why mention it? Because most people don't. His smile softened. My grandma used to say smiling costs less than complaining. She sounds wise. She usually was. A comfortable silence settled again. Neither of us seemed interested in filling it. Eventually my phone buzzed. One message. Grandpa, are you feeding him or should I? I laughed so suddenly that Cooper looked over. What? I turned the screen toward him. He read the message. Then groaned. He's impossible. He really is. You know what he texted me? What? Cooper pulled out his phone. The message read, don't work the city boy too hard. I might need him tomorrow. I laughed even harder. He's coordinating us. He absolutely is. We're being managed. By an 80-year-old mastermind. We both shook our heads. Then Cooper looked toward Grandpa's house across the field. You know? What? I think he's happy you're here. I looked at the familiar porch. So am I. The words came out before I had time to think about them. Cooper looked at me for a second. Not surprised. Just pleased. Good, he said quietly. Because I'm starting to get used to having you around. Something warm settled in my chest. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was simply the realization that, somewhere between fixing fences, climbing ladders, and hiding from the rain, spending time with Cooper had stopped feeling like helping a neighbor. It had started feeling like the best part of every day. And summer had only just begun. By the end of the first week, I'd fallen into a routine I never could have imagined back in the city. Wake up early, drink coffee with Grandpa on the porch, walk across the field after breakfast, spend the day helping Cooper with whatever needed doing, head home tired enough to fall asleep before 10. It was simple, almost suspiciously simple. One Saturday morning, I stepped outside expecting to see Cooper already working. Instead, his driveway was empty. No truck, no trailer, no sound of machinery. Grandpa noticed me looking. He went into town. Oh, you disappointed? No. He raised one eyebrow. You answered too fast. I was just wondering. MHM. You're impossible. So I've heard. I poured another cup of coffee. So what's on today's schedule? Grandpa folded his newspaper. You're helping me. With what? My attic. I looked toward the ceiling. I have a bad feeling. You should. The attic hadn't been cleaned in at least 20 years. Every box contained another box. Every shelf held something Grandpa insisted was still useful. This radio still works. It hasn't had batteries since the 90s. Minor detail. You own 3 broken fishing rods. They're spare. For what? In case another one breaks. That makes absolutely no sense. It makes perfect sense. After nearly 2 hours, we uncovered old family photo albums. Grandpa sat down on an old wooden trunk. Haven't seen these in years. I joined him. The first few pages showed black and white photographs of people I'd only heard stories about. Then came pictures of my grandparents as newlyweds. Then my mom as a little girl. Then I stopped turning the page. What's that? Grandpa smiled. That. He laughed quietly. That's Cooper. The photograph showed 2 boys sitting on the fence between our properties. One was me, maybe 8 years old. The other had messy blonde hair and a missing front tooth. You're kidding. Nope. I don't remember this. You 2 were attached at the hip one summer. I stared at the picture. That can't be right. You don't remember because you only came during school vacations. What happened? You stopped coming for a few years once your parents got busy. I looked closer. There were dozens of pictures. Fishing, building a treehouse, running through sprinklers, playing with Grandpa's old dog. I knew him. Grandpa nodded. Long before either of you could remember. I laughed in disbelief. This feels like information you could have mentioned. I figured you'd discover it eventually. You absolutely planned this. I absolutely did not. You're smiling. I smile a lot. That explains Cooper. Grandpa chuckled. Those 2 smiles are different. How? Cooper smiles because he's hopeful. And me? You smile when you're surprised. I looked back at the old photographs. There was one where Cooper had his arms slung over my shoulder, while both of us grinned proudly beside a tiny wooden birdhouse. I honestly don't remember any of this. Memory's funny. Grandpa carefully closed the album. Some people leave an impression anyway. Around noon, I heard a truck pull into the neighboring driveway. Cooper was back. A few minutes later came a familiar knock. He stepped inside carrying a paper bag. I come bearing peace offerings. Grandpa peeked inside. Apple fritters? Fresh from Miller's Bakery. You're forgiven. For what? I'll think of something. Cooper laughed before turning toward me. You busy? I was losing an argument with attic dust. Sounds serious. It won. He noticed the photo album still sitting on the table. You found those. I held up the picture of us sitting on the fence. You knew? His smile immediately widened. I wondered how long it'd take. You remembered? Of course. I don't remember any of it. He leaned against the table. You cried because you thought frogs were lonely. I stared at him. I did not. You absolutely did. I refused to believe that. You insisted we catch another frog so the first one would have a friend. Grandpa burst out laughing. I forgot about that. I covered my face. This conversation is over. It gets better, Cooper continued. No. You named both frogs. No. You called one Frank. Stop. And the other? Cooper. You named a frog after me. I groaned. This is humiliating. It was adorable. I was 8. You were dramatic. Grandpa wiped tears from his eyes from laughing. You also declared yourselves neighbors forever. I looked between them. You're making this up. Cooper walked over to the album and carefully turned a few pages. There. Another photograph. The 2 of us standing beside the fence with a handwritten sign. Best neighbors. I couldn't stop laughing. I actually made that. You insisted on painting it yourself. It looked terrible. It looked perfect. There was an unexpected softness in Cooper's voice. He looked at the photograph a little longer before closing the album. I always wondered if you'd ever come back. The room grew quiet. I did come back. Yeah. He smiled. You did. Something about the way he said it made the old photograph feel less like a forgotten childhood memory and more like a story that had simply paused for a while before quietly continuing exactly where it had left off. After that afternoon, the old photographs became an ongoing joke between us. Every chance Cooper got, he'd remind me of something I'd apparently done as a kid. You used to collect rocks. Lots of kids collect rocks. You gave them names. I pointed a wrench at him. That sounds fake. It isn't. You're lying. You had one called Captain. I hate that you're probably telling the truth. He grinned. I definitely am. A few days later, Grandpa sent me to borrow a socket wrench he'd somehow misplaced decades earlier. It'll be in Cooper's workshop, he said confidently. You know that. He borrows my tools. So technically it's yours. Exactly. I crossed the field around mid-morning. The workshop door stood open. Hello. In here, Cooper called. The workshop was bigger than I'd expected. Every wall held neatly organized tools. Shelves overflowed with jars full of bolts, screws, hinges, and hardware I couldn't begin to identify. Everything smelled faintly of sawdust and machine oil. Cooper looked up from the workbench. Looking for something? Grandpa claims you stole his socket wrench. I borrowed it. According to him, in 2018. That sounds about right. You still have it. He opened a drawer without even looking. Told you. I laughed. You're proving his point. He's not wrong very often. As I reached for the wrench, my eyes landed on something sitting against the far wall. An old wooden sign. Freshly sanded. Half finished. The words painted across it stopped me. Best neighbors. I turned slowly. You kept it. Cooper looked almost embarrassed. It fell apart years ago. So you're rebuilding it. I thought it'd be nice. For who? He shrugged. For me. The honesty in that answer caught me off guard. He wiped sawdust from his hands. My grandma almost threw it away once. But I couldn't let her. I stepped closer. The lettering wasn't exactly the same as the original. It looked better. Carefully done. You remembered. I remember a lot. There was no teasing in his voice this time. Just quiet certainty. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of the wood. You've had this all these years? Yeah. Why? He looked toward the open doorway before answering. I guess because it reminded me of a summer that felt uncomplicated. I looked back at him. Mine was, too. He smiled. I figured. Neither of us spoke for a while. The workshop suddenly felt much quieter than before. Finally, Cooper broke the silence. You hungry? I could eat. I was making sandwiches. Seems to be your solution for everything. Hasn't failed yet. We carried our lunch outside and sat on overturned buckets beneath the shade of a maple tree beside the workshop. You know, I said between bites, I keep expecting to get bored. And it hasn't happened. He nodded knowingly. Told you. I still don't understand it. What? How you're never in a hurry. He leaned back against the tree. I used to be. What changed? He thought about it for a long moment. My grandfather got sick during my last year in the city. I waited. I came home to help for what I thought would be a few weeks. His eyes drifted toward the fields. Then I realized I'd spent years racing toward. I don't even know what. So you stayed. I stayed. Any regrets? He smiled. Some days. I appreciated the honesty. Really. Mostly because everyone assumes you're giving something up. And are you? I gave up one life. And found another? He nodded. Exactly. I looked across the fields stretching beyond the trees. Back home, I'd measured my weeks by deadlines and meetings. Here, people measured time by rain, harvests, sunsets. There was something strangely comforting about that. You're thinking again, Cooper said. I do that. I noticed. I was wondering something. What? Do you ever miss the city? He smiled. I miss good pizza. I laughed. That's it. And bookstores. Those are reasonable. But I don't miss feeling like every day disappeared before I noticed it. I knew exactly what he meant. Without realizing it, I'd stopped checking my email. Stopped worrying about Monday. Stopped counting the days until I had to leave. That thought caught me by surprise. Leave. For the first time since arriving, I actually didn't want to think about going home. As if reading my mind, Cooper spoke quietly. How much longer are you staying? About 3 weeks. He nodded once. Good. Good. Still plenty of time. For what? He smiled. But this time there was something thoughtful behind it. To make a few more memories you'll actually remember. The words lingered with me long after lunch was over. That evening, I found myself standing on Grandpa's porch watching the last light fade across the fields. The workshop lights glowed softly in the distance. Cooper was still inside, finishing whatever project he'd been working on. Grandpa stepped onto the porch beside me. You've been looking over there a lot. I was just thinking. About. I smiled to myself. Funny thing. What? I came here planning to take a break from life. And I looked toward the neighboring farm one more time. I think life found me anyway. The next week settled into a rhythm that felt almost too perfect to question. Every morning, Cooper seemed to have another project waiting. Some were genuinely important. Others, I began to suspect, existed mostly because he enjoyed the company. On Monday, we repaired an old gate. On Tuesday, we cleared fallen branches after a windy night. Wednesday was spent repainting the front porch of the farmhouse. You know, I said, dipping my brush into another can of white paint. I'm starting to think this farm is never actually finished. It isn't. So there's always something to fix? There'll always be something. That sounds exhausting. He smiled without looking up. I think it's comforting. How? You never run out of reasons to care. I thought about that longer than I expected. Maybe he wasn't talking about the farm anymore. By Thursday afternoon, the July heat had become almost unbearable. Even standing still felt like work. Cooper wiped sweat from his forehead. I've got an idea. I hope it involves air conditioning. It involves the creek. There's a creek. You've forgotten again. I apparently forgot my entire childhood. He laughed. Come on. We walked through a narrow trail behind the fields, shaded by tall trees that blocked most of the afternoon sun. The farther we went, the cooler the air became. Finally, I heard running water. The creek wasn't large. Clear water slipped over smooth stones beneath thick branches that stretched across both banks. It looked untouched. How did I forget this? You spent half a summer here. I clearly wasn't paying attention. You were 8. Fair. We sat on a fallen log beside the water. Neither of us seemed interested in talking right away. The only sounds were the creek and birds hidden somewhere high above us. You know, Cooper said eventually, this was my favorite place growing up. I can see why. My grandfather used to bring me fishing here. You fish? Terribly. I somehow believe that. He laughed. I had more patience for talking than catching anything. That doesn't surprise me either. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface. 3 jumps. 4. 5. Show off. You're welcome to try. I'll embarrass myself. Probably. I found my own stone. This one's perfect. It absolutely isn't. You're ruining my confidence. You'll survive. I threw it anyway. The stone dropped straight into the water with one loud splash. Not even one skip. Cooper stared at the ripples, then looked at me. I've never seen anyone miss that confidently. I committed. You certainly did. I think the stone was defective. Obviously. I picked up another. This one managed exactly one skip before sinking. I improved. Technically. I'll take technically. He leaned back against the log. You've gotten competitive. You laughed at me. I've laughed at you a lot. You have. And somehow you keep coming back. I looked toward the slow-moving water. Yeah, I do. There was another quiet pause. Then Cooper spoke again. Can I admit something? Always. The first couple days. He rubbed the back of his neck. I kept expecting you'd decide this place was too boring. I know. You know? You said something like that before. I meant it. He smiled awkwardly. I figured after helping with a fence and a roof, you'd disappear in a town looking for something more exciting. And instead, you keep showing up. I laughed softly. So do you? Well, he looked around at the empty woods. I kind of live here. Minor advantage. He smiled. True. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You know what's strange? What? I haven't thought about work in days. That seems healthy. I haven't checked my email either. Healthier. My coworkers probably think I disappeared. They'll survive. I know. The truth was, for the first time in years, I wasn't counting down until my vacation ended. I was quietly hoping time would slow down. Cooper skipped another stone. You're leaving eventually. The words weren't a question. No, they aren't. I know. Neither of us looked at each other. I've been thinking about that. So have I. He sighed. I told myself not to. Why? Because summers end. Simple. Matter of fact. But there was something behind those words that felt much heavier. I finally turned toward him. Hey. He looked over. We've still got almost 3 weeks. His smile returned, smaller this time. Yeah, we do. And I don't want to waste them worrying about the last day. He studied me for a second before nodding. I like that plan. So do I. We stayed beside the creek until the sun began slipping lower through the trees. On the walk back, our shoulders brushed once as the trail narrowed. Neither of us moved away. Neither of us mentioned it. Some things didn't need words. As we stepped out of the woods, Grandpa's porch came into view in the distance. He was sitting in his rocking chair exactly where we expected him to be. Even from across the field, I could tell he had spotted us. He's watching, Cooper said. He always is. You think he knows? I smiled. He knew before we did. That evening, Grandpa waited until Cooper disappeared into his farmhouse before saying a single word. Well, I looked up from my plate. Well, what? How long before you admit you like him? I nearly choked on my iced tea. I've been here 9 days. MHM. We're friends. MHM. You're making that face. What face? The one where you've already decided you're right. Grandpa smiled innocently. I've lived a long time, Chase. That doesn't answer the question. It answers enough. I laughed, shaking my head. You know what's unfair? What? You never push. I don't have to. He stood and carried his plate to the sink. You'll figure it out. That was all he said. The conversation ended there. But somehow it stayed with me. The next morning started earlier than usual. Just after sunrise, my phone buzzed. Need your opinion on something. Coffee first. It was from Cooper. I smiled before I realized I was smiling. 5 minutes. When I crossed the field, he was already sitting on the porch steps with 2 mugs. You're getting predictable, I said. So are you. He handed me one. You actually make good coffee. I've had years of practice. We sat quietly for a minute. The farm hadn't fully woken up yet. Morning mist still hung over the fields. Everything felt calm. So, I finally asked, what important opinion do you need? He scratched the back of his neck. I may have exaggerated. So there isn't a decision? There is. He pointed toward the old barn. I want to repaint it before fall. I stared at the enormous building. You call that a small decision? I wasn't asking you to paint all of it today. Oh, good. I was only asking if red is still the right color. I laughed. It's a barn. Exactly. Aren't barns legally required to be red? That's what my grandfather used to say. So maybe he was right. You're seriously considering changing it? I considered dark green for about 10 minutes. And I came to my senses. I would have questioned your judgment. I figured. He smiled into his coffee. I mostly wanted an excuse to invite you over. The sentence came so naturally that I wasn't sure he'd realized he'd said it out loud. He seemed to notice a second later. Oh, I looked at him. Well, he rubbed the back of his neck. That sounded smoother in my head. I couldn't stop smiling. I appreciated the honesty. Good. Though pretending the barn needed emotional support was ambitious. He laughed. I panicked. You're surprisingly bad at improvising. I know. The easy silence returned. Neither of us seemed uncomfortable. Eventually, Cooper stood. I've actually got something to show you. What? Come on. He led me around the side of the barn toward a narrow gravel path I'd never noticed before. After a few hundred yards, the trees opened into a wide meadow. Wildflowers covered nearly everything. Yellow, purple, white. The morning breeze made the entire field move like gentle waves. I stopped walking. Cooper, yeah, this is beautiful. He smiled. I thought you might like it. You've been hiding this. Not intentionally. Does Grandpa know? He does. And he never mentioned it. He probably wanted me to. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. We wandered slowly through the meadow. Butterflies drifted between flowers. Bees buzzed lazily from one bloom to another. It felt completely untouched. My grandmother planted the first section, Cooper said quietly. The rest just happened. I looked around. You kept it. She loved this place. She had good taste. He nodded. She always said flowers don't care whether anyone notices them. I looked toward him. She sounds like someone I'd have liked. You would have. There was no sadness in his voice. Just affection. We reached the middle of the meadow where an old wooden bench overlooked the valley beyond. The view stretched for miles. Fields, trees, rolling hills disappearing into the distance. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Cooper broke the silence. Can I ask you something? You've asked that before. I know. You can. He rested his forearms on his knees. When you go back, I felt my chest tighten before he'd even finished. Yeah. Will you miss this place? I looked across the valley. Yes. The farm. I thought about it. The farm. Grandpa. The quiet mornings. The creek. The old workshop. The porch. Then I looked at Cooper. And the people in it. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the ground for a moment before smiling to himself. You know? What? I was trying very hard not to hope you'd say something like that. I know. You do? I've been trying not to hope a few things myself. For the first time since we'd met again, neither of us joked. Neither of us looked away. The breeze moved softly through the meadow around us. It felt like the entire morning had slowed to a stop. Then Cooper smiled, that familiar, genuine smile I'd noticed on the very first day. "I think," he said quietly, "this might be the longest conversation we've ever had without one of us making a terrible joke." I laughed. "You just ruined it." "I know. And honestly, what? I'm glad you did." Because somehow, the jokes had become part of us. The easy laughter, the quiet conversations, the comfortable silences. None of it felt forced anymore. It simply felt like spending another morning with someone I was beginning to care about much more than I'd planned. The last week arrived much faster than either of us wanted to admit. No one said it out loud. Not Grandpa, not Cooper, not me. But suddenly everything felt smaller somehow, as if every morning mattered a little more because there weren't many left. On my final Saturday, Grandpa announced he was driving into town for breakfast with old friends. "I'll be gone most of the day. Have fun." "I plan to." He paused before climbing into his truck. Cooper mentioned he had something to finish. I laughed. Of course he did. Grandpa pointed a finger at me. "Don't laugh." "What?" "Some opportunities don't come back around." Then he drove away before I could ask what he meant. I crossed the field a few minutes later. Cooper was standing beside the old fence we'd repaired on my first day. "The fence?" I asked. It seemed appropriate. He looked almost nervous. "That was new. You okay?" "Yeah." He took a slow breath. "I finished something." He walked toward the workshop and returned carrying the wooden sign. The restored one. Fresh paint. Smooth edges. The same words we'd painted as children. "Best neighbors." "It looks incredible." "You think?" "I know." He turned the sign over. On the back, burned carefully into the wood, was a date from our childhood. And beneath it, "Found each other again." I looked up at him. "You added that?" "I did." "It's perfect." "I hoped you'd think so." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Cooper leaned the sign against the fence. "I've been thinking all week." "So have I." He smiled faintly. "I figured." He looked out across both properties. "When you leave tomorrow." The sentence trailed away. "I know. I don't really know how to do this part." I laughed quietly. "I don't either." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I spent years convincing myself I was happy with this farm being my whole world. And then you showed up. I felt my heart beating noticeably faster. You made everything feel bigger." The words were simple. There was no dramatic speech. No perfect declaration. Just honesty. I stepped a little closer. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "I came here planning to stay a month. And now, I don't know how to go back to pretending this summer didn't happen." He nodded slowly. "I don't want you to." Neither of us moved. Neither of us rushed the moment. Finally, I smiled. "Good. Good. Because I was hoping you'd say that." He laughed softly. So, you live 3 hours away." "I do." "You have a job." "I do." "You probably can't repair fences every weekend." "I think that's for the best." He smiled. "I was wondering." He stopped himself. "What? What if this doesn't have to end tomorrow?" I looked at him. "It doesn't." "I mean, I know what you mean." I reached over and gently squeezed his hand. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. Just enough to let him know he wasn't standing there alone. "We'll figure it out." "You really think so?" "I do." He let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for days. "I was hoping you'd say that." "I know." We stayed there for another hour, talking about practical things. Weekend visits. Video calls. Taking turns making the drive. None of it sounded impossible anymore. When the conversation finally faded, Cooper looked toward Grandpa's porch. "You think he planned all of this?" I laughed. "I think he planned exactly enough." That evening, Grandpa found me sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Tomorrow's the big drive." "Yeah." He settled into the rocking chair beside me. "You look different." "How?" "Lighter." I smiled. "I feel different." He nodded once. "I hoped you would." After a minute, I asked quietly, "Did you know?" "About what?" "Me and Cooper." Grandpa chuckled. I knew two stubborn boys who smiled more whenever the other one was around. And the rest wasn't my story to write. The next morning, my bags were already packed before breakfast. Leaving felt strange. Not because I didn't want to go home. Because home suddenly felt like two different places. Cooper pulled into Grandpa's driveway just as I finished loading the truck. Neither of us said much at first. "You'll text me when you get there?" "I will. And don't ignore my calls." "I wouldn't dare." He smiled. "I mean it." "I know." Grandpa cleared his throat loudly from the porch. I'll pretend I don't see either of you standing here. Neither of us could stop laughing. Cooper looked back at me. I'll see you next weekend. Next weekend. You promise? I promise. Before climbing into my truck, I looked once more across the fields. The repaired fence, the red barn, the workshop, the meadow hidden beyond the trees. All the places that had become part of one unforgettable summer. Then I looked at Cooper. A month earlier, he'd simply been my grandpa's neighbor. Now he was the reason 3 hours no longer felt like a long drive. As I pulled onto the country road, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Grandpa was waving from the porch. Cooper stood beside the fence, smiling exactly the way he had on the very first morning. Only this time, neither of us wondered whether we'd see each other again. We already knew. Some summers become memories. This one became the beginning of the rest of my life.